So in today's talk, Dr. Liu will address these unique challenges and discuss the current Canadian ROS1 clinical trials. And then he will answer our questions. So, Dr. Liu.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. So I want to keep this as informal as possible. I'm not able to see anyone because I'm sharing my screen. So if you do have a really urgent question and so forth, just scream out or interrupt me. And we want to keep this as informal as possible. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the different trials, but really the purpose of talking about the trials is really to talk about the drugs that are available. And also to give a sense of the access that we have in Canada to these drugs. At the very end of my talk, I'll be giving a little bit of information about other things that might be relevant to ROS1 patients as well. So there are 6 drugs that are in one form or another available or used for ROS1 patients. They include the first generation Crizotinib and entrectinib. The second and third generation Repotrectinib and Taletrectinib, the third generation zidesamtinib, and the second generation lorlatinib. So all of these are just complicated names, but that's how they've actually named these drugs. So I'm going to first talk about the current drug access. Now, at the moment, if you have a very early stage tumor that is resected, surgery is the standard for it. There's no, and if you're ROS1 positive, it's still just surgery alone, plus or minus chemotherapy on top of that. I think there's going to be a new trial coming up where after surgery for ROS1 positive patients, so this is very early stage type patients, patients could be receiving Taletrectinib, one of the drugs, for a few years to hopefully reduce the chances of the cancer coming back. But that's not open yet. For our stage 3 patients, these are patients who are unresectable, but still potentially curable. The current standard is chemoradiation plus or minus immunotherapy. What's upcoming is likely that as the new drugs are approved, they will also be likely approved not only for incurable or metastatic stage 4 patients, but also for stage 3 patients as well. So the bulk of what I will be talking about is actually the late stage or metastatic lung cancer patients. So that'll be stage 3C or stage 4. What is currently available in most of Canada, and I'm being a little bit vague because there's in some cases, some individual variations or differences. Like, for instance, I don't think anything is available if you live in Prince Edward Island, for instance. But in most of the country, if you are diagnosed with ROS1 metastatic lung cancer, Crizotinib or entrectinib are the drugs that are available. And in most provinces, one or both of these drugs are funded. And that's considered the first line standard. But I'm going to be talking about some of the other drugs because there's been a significant improvement with the new drugs in terms of how they work, and in some cases in terms of the side effects, but mostly in terms of how well they work in this case. So I will be talking about Repotrectinib, zidesamtinib, Taletrectinib, and lorlatinib as well. So if we just look at the late stage patients, if I put them on here, what do we know about these drugs? Well, first of all, if you were newly diagnosed with ROS1 positive lung cancer, the 2 current drugs that are available, Crizotinib and entrectinib, tend to work for roughly about a year and a half. Now, there's a lot of variability. There are some patients who, unfortunately, it doesn't work in at all. And so they go on the drug, they come off the drug within a couple of months. And then there's some patients that literally are on Crizotinib or entrectinib for years and years and years. So when we say an average length of time, we're just talking about basically the median. But there is a tail for each of these drugs. I have patients And I think there might be even people here on the line who may have been on Crizotinib for 5, 6, 7, 8 years at this point. So the 1.5 years is just a benchmarking to get people to understand in general how well the drug works. How well these drugs work for individual patients will vary dramatically. Obviously, if the average or the median is much longer, then chances are more and more people will fall into the category of being on the drug and benefiting from these drugs even longer. So where are the differences now? Well, the next drug to come online is Repotrectinib. So Repotrectinib, if given in the first-line setting, which means around the time that you're diagnosed, as the first pill or the first tyrosine kinase inhibitor that's given, you get on average about 3 years, almost 3 years out of in terms of benefit. Can you still access Repotrectinib? Barely. The trial Trident 1 and Trident 3 are both closing, and Bristol Myers Squibb has not decided at the moment whether to provide access to the drug in Canada. That's kind of disappointing. Just announced, though, is the fact that it is just approved as of yesterday or today in Europe. So we might have to do a bit of letter writing campaign or something to kind of push Bristol Myers Squibb to at least provide this drug available. So that is the second one on the Repotrectinib, where it says almost 3 years as the average. The next drug that's used in the first-line setting is zidesamtinib. Currently, that trial is open to take individuals regardless of how many prior lines of therapy, prior treatments they've had. But they're basically shutting it down at the end of January and leaving only a few arms that are open. Patients who are newly diagnosed, which is unfortunately not most of you, and those patients who have a ROS1 fusion but are not lung cancer, or so in other words, if you have a pancreatic cancer or a colon cancer that is ROS1 positive, then this drug on trial you will be able to get. And then if you're an adolescent with lung cancer, which is pretty rare, then you could possibly have access to it. That drug has not been tested very much in the first-line setting. So that's why they want to recruit more patients right now who've never had a prior drug before. And that's why there's a bunch of question marks beside the first line. We don't know about that data. What we do know is the best drug for first-line use at the moment is Taletrectinib. That drug is available in Toronto and also in Montreal. I'm working hard to try to get a compassionate access, which means for those people who live too far away from Toronto and Montreal, can't travel to those places, or who are just too sick to travel, we're trying to get access for you to have access to those drugs when the time comes. The trial, I was just told less than an hour ago, will be open for at least 6 more months at this time. And the reason why this is the current best drug that we know of is the data suggests that if you're taking it as a first-line drug, on average, you get almost 4 years, 46 months. And again, that means that half of the patients will have longer than 46 months of benefit. And that's not how long they live. That's how long that they're on that first drug, knowing that there's still chemotherapy, potentially other drugs down the line. You know, if they get 4 years out of this drug, I suspect both Taletrectinib and zidesamtinib will be available for use. And so if we can just get people, as long as possible on a drug, and then when they fail, we try to get them on a second drug and so forth, that will be a benefit. The last drug, lorlatinib, has not been tested in the first-line setting and is generally used when people fail the first-line drug, the first drug that they use. So can we get more bang for a buck if we start off with one drug and then switch to another? The answer is yes. When we look at next-line therapy, we know that crizotinib and entrectinib only work for first line. Okay? And of the two drugs, crizotinib has overall fewer side effects than entrectinib. It's generally better tolerated. But entrectinib, on the other hand, can control the disease in the brain better as well. And these are the two that are generally available in Canada for first line. Just so you know, for all those people who are living in around the Toronto area and also, I guess, around Montreal, we've been trying to get the word out that if our oncology colleagues, if our cancer specialists out in the community have a newly diagnosed ROS1 patient, send them to us. And we would rather put them on the taletrectinib drug because it looks like you get more than twice on average benefit than with these two drugs. If you do go on to one of those drugs and eventually the disease comes back or starts to regrow again, most of the drugs that we use in second-line setting give about a year on average. But again, some patients I know who have been on for 2 or 3 years already on the second-line drug, and some don't. It doesn't work at all. So the averages don't mean anything for individual patients. They just benchmark a little bit for us. Repotrectinib, taletrectinib, and lorlatinib, as well as zidesamtinib, all can be used in the next-line setting. The problem is, after the end of January, it's going to be lorlatinib or taletrectinib. How do you access taletrectinib? On trial. And again, as I mentioned, I'm trying very hard to actually get the company to release the drug for those people who don't qualify or after the trial closes. And lorlatinib is we can get the drug by appealing case by case, one by one, writing a letter to Pfizer. So it wouldn't be you, it would be your oncologist to do so. So at the end of the day, I try to keep track of what's happening with all of these drugs, how to access them. If you ever run into a problem or a friend or another member of the ROS1ers runs into a problem in Canada, they should feel free to contact me or have their oncologist contact me, and I'll run over with them to tell them what's available. So what's available now today may be very different in 6 months' time and maybe different in 12 months' time. But we're always trying to advocate one form or another. So I'll stop right there and move on to the next slide. Are there any questions so far?
Yeah, can I ask a quick question? Yeah, suppose I started to use taletrectinib as a start, right?
Yes.
But suppose taletrectinib stop working, can I go back to use other first line therapy? Like, can I go back to entrectinib?
Yeah. So the thing is that because crizotinib and entrectinib are actually funded provincially, right? So it's actually publicly funded. It depends on the criteria from province to province. So a lot of times, if the province hasn't paid for the first line therapy, it doesn't consider it first line therapy. So we get away with it in Ontario by basically saying it's the first time that they're on a tyrosine kinase inhibitor that the government is paying for. So there are different ways that we do this, right? So I believe British Columbia is pretty lenient. Alberta is mostly lenient. I don't know about Manitoba. So it is province by province when it comes to this. And the decisions are also fairly arbitrary. So sometimes, if you run into that situation, again, the best thing to do is have your oncologist contact me, for instance. I work with them to try to make a case why. All right. Yeah. And again, it also depends on whether you've got private coverage or if it's public. So I'm glad that wasn't recorded. Okay. So does that give you a sense of the things we do? Yeah. And I think the other thing is that a lot of oncologists might be afraid to do some of this. So I've had, and it's happening right now, I've had some of them transfer the care of the patient to me. I do the dirty work, and then I transfer back to them after magically the patient's now on a different drug.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the key
Thank
thing
you.
is that they need to actually sort this out and contact me first. It's much harder if they've already appealed 3 times to the government, got nowhere, and then suddenly we're using a different reason. Can you see what I mean? So if you run into a problem, the best thing to do is to have that discussion with me first.
Okay. For sure, we will tell other
And
patients about it. And Jeremy, you have a questions?
Yes.
Jeremy?
Jeremy, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Go ahead.
I was curious. I know the data isn't released yet, but anecdotally, what's the success rate of zidesamtinib as a second line?
Yeah, it's almost certainly going to be better than a year.
Okay, so that's good
Okay.
news.
That's my sense, is that it's going to be better than a year. I can't say much more than that. And quietly, we have some patients who have been on like first line something and then eventually went on second line taletrectinib. So they get maybe about a year out of it, and now they're actually responding to zidesamtinib. So
Okay.
at the moment, I have a tendency to put people on taletrectinib first, and then switch over to zidesamtinib afterwards if both drugs are available. I believe we're the only center in Canada, and probably I think the only one in North America, that has both trials open. So our data is really the only data in the entire in the entire world, because that actually has patients who were on taletrectinib and then went on to zidesamtinib.
Yeah, no, you have
in that setting.
You have a great center. It's just too bad real estate is so expensive in the GTA.
It is, and we're also working on trying to get compassionate access too. When we have compassionate access, it is likely the company might restrict it to places who previously have treated patients before. So what we would do is we would have patients maybe come from far away. We start the drug here. If it's compassionate access, compassionate means outside of a trial, right? Because they'd be afraid of people using it when they don't have any experience with it. So then what we would do is start the drug here, send the patient back, do telephone visits with them, and then, maybe have a 3-way conversation with the local oncologist. So the local oncologist develops some experience with it, and then the patient doesn't have to keep on coming back and forth. That's the plan. But we got to get the companies to agree, and that's what we're working on right now. We don't have as much of a pull right now because, as I said, I just heard the taletrectinib trial is going to be kept open until at least June of 2025. So when we get to April and May is when I start screaming and yelling at the companies saying we need to continue to have access to this drug. Okay, and Pfizer's been really, really good on a case-by-case basis. I've not had a single rejection, and that's been they've been very kind in terms of allowing that drug to be accessed by patients.
Interesting. And you mentioned that taletrectinib right now is the leading one because of that first line data of almost 4 years. Am I right in understanding that patients that are on crizotinib or entrectinib, as long as things are still working on that drug, that they shouldn't switch?
You shouldn't switch. It's like the devil you don't know, right?
Okay.
Because the idea is that patients who failed these drugs early, right? They'll declare themselves in the first few years. But if you've been on the drug for already a few years already, you might be in the subset of patients that will do well really long term, and then you'll end up switching to another drug where you don't know if it's going to work or not.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is that if you're doing well, and then maybe you won't be able to tolerate that drug, right? So the general idea is that if you're stable on a drug, don't look to say the grass is greener next door. When you walk over there, you might find out that it's not greener at all, right? You're better off where you are right now. And at least you know what the side effects are, you know how things are going. So I'm going to show you one more in here, which are the side effects in here. So again, these are in general. For an individual patient, a drug that I'm scared of using sometimes might have no side effects in a patient, right? But on average, these are the issues. Crizotinib has some side effects, but usually very manageable. Zidesamtinib and taletrectinib both are very manageable in terms of side effects as well. Repotrectinib and entrectinib have both TrkB. So the drug attacks TrkB receptors in the brain and has a lot of side effects when it comes to this. In fact, I don't start people on entrectinib full dose. I start them on 1 pill a day and slowly increase it to 3 because otherwise it's very hard to get them up in this case. But again, there are exceptions to the rule. There might be some of you who are online who either know somebody or are on it yourself on full dose entrectinib without a problem. It's just in general. These are issues. And the drug that is not going to be available to us very soon, at least unless we can convince Bristol Myers Squibb to actually to supply it in Canada, has a lot of side effects. We've had a lot of trouble with Repotrectinib. So that gives you a sense of the side effects. And as a result, if you're newly diagnosed, Taletrectinib is probably the way to go at the moment until we see what happens with zidesamtinib. There's just not enough data for that right now. And for the next line of therapy, if I can get my hands on zidesamtinib, that's the one that I would go for right now. But if not, just any of the other ones is still better than nothing. Does that help people give them a sense of where we are right now?
Yes, thank you.
And the idea is that, as long as we have more drugs to use, the more the merrier, right? There's no sense that you need to go from the earliest drug to the latest drug. Sometimes you can jump around to basically whatever drugs you can get your hands on and see if it works or not. Our understanding isn't fully clear as to why the drugs work in some people and not in others. Was there a question?
I have a question, yeah. Hi, doctor. I'm your patient. My first line is the NVL 520. I'm on cycle 9. Little side effects, very baby one. I'm very happy. So I was wondering, I've read on the internet that they are closing in January 2025. So that's what worries me. I'm very happy with that.
No. If you're in the trial, they will continue giving you the drug.
Okay, thank you.
In fact, you're newly diagnosed. Right?
Yeah, I'm on cycle 9.
So
yes,
because you're newly diagnosed, that's the one arm that they're still open because they're desperate for more people because that's why they want to get rid of those 3 question marks there. And to do that, they need to enroll more people who are newly diagnosed. They don't have enough right now.
I'm just 9. Mine is cycle 9. That's it. So nothing to worry for the coming few.
No. The company is not allowed ethically to pull the rug from you if you're already on the drug.
I'm happy with it.
Okay, you can imagine how ethically wrong that is to put someone on a drug, give them hope, and then suddenly say, oh, well, we're closing the trial, so we're going to pull the rug. No, that isn't going to happen.
Thank you.
The problem is we won't have access to this drug for the next patient that gets newly diagnosed. That's our concern.
But people who are getting it, they continue to get.
Absolutely. That is not going to be an issue.
And there's no period.
It's not considered ethical, and you can imagine the really bad press a company will get for even thinking of doing that.
Not even until, maybe 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. As long as working on me,
well, I mean, if zidesamtinib is actually might end up becoming better than taletrectinib, then it might be even more than 4 years, right? For all you know.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
And to be fair, right? Like there was a period where we only had access to zidesamtinib, so we put people on zidesamtinib because it was the only thing available. We didn't have any data on whether it was going to be effective in the first line setting or not, right? But it was what was available, so we did it. But yeah, if you can get your hands on any of the later drugs, zidesamtinib and taletrectinib, that would be good. That's how I see it. That they're for sure going to be better than the other drugs. But if you've been on those drugs for a while, like the early drugs for a while, then you're probably through the hump where if you're going to fail, you're probably going to fail by then. So you're probably in the long-term benefit group. Okay, so don't change. In other words, don't change if you're doing well on the drug you're on.
No, I'm very happy. I'm not going to change. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions before I move on?
Jeremy was asking any idea when the zidesamtinib data will be published?
Okay, so it is a possibility it'll come out during ASCO, in June. They haven't said anything yet, one way or the other. They're keeping it pretty close, right now. And the other things that I do know, I can't say much of. I'm sorry, I'm bound by confidentiality. But this is as much clue as I can possibly give you. Having said that, both taletrectinib and zidesamtinib are so much better than the other drugs in terms of the side effects and in terms of, the expected benefit of the drug on patients, that as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter which drug, as long as you get access to one of the two.
I had a question, when a trial ends, how long it takes them to reopen, as a approved drug or something? How long it takes?
Yeah. We're jumping to the question period, which I think is great. No. I can answer this right now. It's between 2 to 3.5 years in Canada, and let me tell you why. Because as soon as the drug data comes out, U.S. is the biggest market, so they'll file in the U.S. with the FDA first. That'll take a few months. And then they'll file in the European Union with the European Medicines Agency next, because that's the next biggest market, right? And so by the time they file in Canada, it's already 8 or 9 months after the data's come out, because it's usually the same team that goes from country to country and then gets the data and sends it in. And they can't work on 10 countries at the same time. So they always do the U.S. first. And then they do Europe. Then they might do, a couple other countries, and Canada's usually number 5, 6, or 7 in that setting. So there's already a bit of delay there. Then they file for Health Canada, which is federal, to document safety and efficacy. And then afterwards, they file for CDA, which covers most of the provinces, except for Quebec, which is INES, which looks at cost effectiveness. So there's a federal government that looks at, is it safe and effective? And then there's the provincial groups that are looking at, well, can we afford it? And then afterwards, there's a pricing. And then afterwards, the individual negotiation for province to province. 4 steps. That's why it takes 2 to 3 years. It's horrible. So what we try to do is get companies to open programs where they give out the drug for free while they're waiting for all these steps to go through. The drugs will never be available usually until the first step. The federal government or Health Canada says that it's safe and effective. And then at that point, we try to get companies to give the drug out for free from that point onwards until they're covered by the provincial formularies. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
So we try not to have people wait that long, but some of these are smaller companies. Zidesamtinib, like Nuvalent, is a small company. Taletrectinib is Nuvation Bio, which is also a small company, right? So we really have to work hard to convince them that, it's worth the while. Like gigantic companies, it's a drop in the bucket for them to actually open a compassionate access program. It is more of a big deal. It's a larger chunk of money relative to their investors, and the money that they have on hand, for a smaller company. So I'm working on that, just so you know.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Does that,
Yeah.
Shall I move on?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. So what should you be aware of? What other things should you be aware of? Well, one of the things that happens is that if you've been stable on a drug, perfectly fine. But if at some time that the drug stops working, one of the things that we're starting to recommend is a combination of either biopsying one of the spots that's growing, and if possible, a blood test and both of these are done specifically to look for new mutations. Because sometimes that might help guide us in saying that maybe the next drug shouldn't be zidesamtinib or taletrectinib, but might need to be a drug that targets another pathway. So that's something that we're recommending. If you're out in the community center, you might not even be told of this. Again, when in doubt, contact me. Contact us. Right now, we're able to do the liquid biopsy for free. If you were to pay for it, it's about between $3,000 and $5,000 Canadian plus HST on top of that. The rebiopsy means actually someone sticking a needle in and biopsying something else, but sometimes it's actually worthwhile. For many of the folks who go on trial, we've had to do that. We may try to ask for as many exceptions as possible, but it's sometimes very useful to help us figuring out what the next drug should be anyway. So that's something to think about. I talked about compassionate access programs already. When should you consider a second opinion? Basically, when something doesn't seem right, when you're being told that the treatment is no longer working, and you need to figure out what to do next, right? And the second opinion is useful for all those reasons that I said, to make sure that you've looked at all of the opinions and all of the potential drugs, as well as the backdoor methods for getting access to drugs. Right. So those are all the reasons, as well as, the second opinions can give you access to the liquid biopsy and these other ways to actually try to figure out what is the best next drug for you. All right. And then it's really important to think about these clinical trials and then all these drugs as giving you more opportunities to find a drug that will match with your disease rather than, oh my God, it's a guinea pig type thing. So many of our patients are benefiting during the time in which they're receiving the drug in a clinical trial. You just heard one of the people say that right now. That is important to actually do so. Sorry, let me let that person in from the lobby. All right, and then I'm going to cover a little bit after this 3 areas: advocacy, research, and education. Over the next few slides as well. Any questions so far about this portion?
Yeah, Jeremy had a question. So
okay, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, would you mind walking us through what are the steps for a second opinion? For example, if we'd be interested in a remote second opinion with you, how would we go about obtaining that?
So the easiest thing to do is to actually have the local oncologist email me, or have the local oncologist fill in a referral form for Princess Margaret. Many of them already know how to do that. I'm already pretty well known for ALK and ROS1, and you'll see later on, I run a national network for collecting data on all of this. So, but if not, at the end of this presentation, my email will be on a slide, and you all can write it down.
Okay.
When it comes to this and send it to people as well. It's important. It's a small community. ROS1 is a small community. So it's important that we all share what we have and we all give each of us the best possibilities, the best chances moving forward, because it can make a difference. All right.
Thank you.
Any other questions before I move on? Okay. So I'm going to spend just 2 minutes on the basis of looking at scientific data, just so when if you guys were to be shown a bunch of slides and things, you're going, I don't know what this means. This is what we call a waterfall plot. It tells you what is the best thing that has happened to the tumor after you start treating it, and anything that's pointing down means that it's shrinking. Anything that's pointing up from the horizontal line means that it's growing. So those two, can you see my arrow? Can you guys see my arrow at all? Okay, yeah. Yes. So these 3 or 4 patients, for instance, each one of these bars is a person, right? This person did really poorly because the tumor grew like 60%, right? But then if you look at it, if you look at the waterfall plot, look at the split between those people with a tumor shrank at least a little to those who grew, right? And you can actually see that a drug like this, you would expect would work on the vast majority of patients. And you can see that because it says that 88% of patients had at least a significant shrinkage. What does significant mean? It means that they shrank below this dotted line. Okay? This dotted line, anything above them means that it's grown. Anything in between here means that it's thought to be, it may have grown a little, may have shrunk a little, but still considered stable in this setting. So one look at this plot, you can see this drug is really good. It causes a lot of shrinkage, and in some cases it shrinks all the way down to 0. In other words, not detectable anymore. right? And so these are the patients that are receiving first line. Down here, the patients who are receiving this drug second and subsequent line. Not quite as good, but still, vast majority are pointing down. So a waterfall plot tells you that information, and these things called ORR, which is the objective or overall response rate, the higher the number, closer to 100%, the better off that is. These are survival curves, which means that at the beginning, everybody is alive and doing well. And that as time goes on, in this case, it's progression-free survival, PFS, which means anyone in which the disease has come back is then taken off as time goes on. So you can see it starts dropping from 100% to lower and lower and lower. When we talk about, an average of 1 year or average of 4 years, what we actually mean is the 50% line, right? So this is the 50% line. I draw it all the way across. I draw all the way across. And you can tell this is taletrectinib, right? Because it crosses down at